Hello, teacher and classmates. My name is Keila Tello, and with my partners Paloma Cruz and William Pech, we are going to talk about assessing listening. First, we have to consider the following questions. What is the importance of the listening skill? Is the listening skill a receptive or productive skill? Which are the four basic types of listening? And which are the micro and macro skills of listening? The importance of listening. Listening is a significant language skill to develop in second language learning. Despite its importance, language learners consider listening as the most difficult language skill to learn. Many language learners focus a lot on speaking. They don't spend as much effort on quietly listening. Listening is a vital skill for language learning. I consider that the listening skill is very important. Learners need to develop the listening skills so they can engage in conversations. If the listener doesn't understand what the speaker is saying, he won't be able to respond to the speaker. Learners need to develop the skill to be able to participate in conversations. Research shows that when we communicate, we spend around 40–50% of our time listening, 25–30% speaking, 11–16% reading, and only 9% writing, although the last one may have changed in recent years due to the rise in social media, such as Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, and texting. That means we spend about half the time listening. Listening comprehension is a receptive skill, as opposed to speaking, which is productive. This doesn't mean it is a passive skill. Much to the contrary, listening comprehension is an interactive process in which listeners interact with the text, tasks, and the context, external and internal, such as the situation and background knowledge. Now we're going to see the basic types of listening. There are four basic types of listening. These are intensive, responsive, extensive, and selective. Intensive listening is listening for perception of the components, like phonemes, words, intonation, discourse markers. Responsive listening is listening to a relatively short stretch of language, a greeting, question, command, comprehension check, to give a short response. Selective listening is processing stretches of discourse, such as short monologues for several minutes, in order to scan for certain information. The purpose is to be able to comprehend designated information in a context of longer stretches of spoken language, classroom directions, TV or radio news items, or stories. Extensive listening. It ranges from listening to lengthy lectures to listening to a conversation and deriving a comprehensive message of purpose. Listening for the gist, for the main idea, and making inferences are part of extensive listening. Now we're going to check the micro and macro skills of listening. These are by Richards, 1983. Number 1. Discriminate among the distinctive sounds of English. 2. Retain chunks of language of different lengths in short-term memory. 3. Recognize English stress patterns, words in stress and unstressed positions, rhythmic structure, intonation contours, and their role in signaling information. 4. Recognize reduced forms of words. 5. Distinguish word boundaries, recognize a core of words, and interpret word order patterns and their significance. 6. Process speech at different rates of delivery. 7. Process speech containing pauses, errors, corrections, and other performance variables. 8. Recognize grammatical word classes, nouns, verbs, systems, tense, agreement, pluralization, patterns, roles, and elliptical forms. 9. Detect sentence constituents and distinguish between major and minor constituents. 10. Recognize that a particular meaning might be expressed in different grammatical forms. 11. Recognize cohesive devices in spoken discourse. Now we go to the macro skills, also Richards, 1983. Number 12. Recognize the communicative functions of utterances according to situations, participants, and goals. 13. Infer situations, participants, and goals using real-world knowledge. Number 14. From events, ideas, and so on, describe, predict outcomes, infer links and connections between events, deduce causes and effects, and detect such relations as main idea, supporting idea, new information, given information, generalization, and exemplification. Number 15. Distinguish between literal and implied meanings. Number 16. Use facial, kinesthetic, body language, and other nonverbal clues to decipher meanings. 17. Develop and use a battery of listening strategies such as detecting keywords, guessing the meaning of words from context, appealing for help, and signaling comprehension or lack thereof. Now we continue with the presentation.
Before we start with the designing of assessment tasks about intensive listening and responsive listening, we must know what intensive listening and responsive listening are. So intensive listening is listening for something in specific. Students must focus their attention on some parts of the language, like words or phonemes or intonation. And responsive listening is when students listen to a small stretch of language and then they respond to that stimuli. So, designing assessment tasks, in this case about intensive listening, how do we design them? Once we determine the objectives, we should design the task. We should make decisions about how we will elicit performance and how we will expect the test takers to respond. So the difficulty of the test should be enough for the students. Recognizing phonological and morphological elements. A typical form of intensive listening at this level is the assessment of recognition of phonological and morphological elements of language. Classic task gives a spoken stimulus and asks test takers to identify the stimulus from two or more choices, as in the next two examples. For example, test takers hear "he's from California" and they read and should answer from two choices, like "he's from California" or "she's from California." It could be phonemic vowels, like "is he living" or "is he living." In both cases above, minimal phonemic distinctions are the target, so they must know the small details like one letter or one long letter or vowel. If you are testing recognition of morphology, you can use the same format. For example, if they hear "I missed you very much," they must know, they must recognize the end of the ed ending. Hearing the past tense morpheme in this sentence challenges even advanced learners, especially if no context is provided. So context is very important for many tasks, for many listening tasks. Stress and stress words may also be tested with the same rubric. In the following example, the contraction of "cannot" is tested. So they may hear "my girlfriend can't go to the party," and they should answer from two options, like "can't" or "can." So they must be able to recognize a stress pattern. Because they are contextualized, these kinds of tasks leave something to be desired in their authenticity. So normally they don't give any kind of context. But they are a step better than items that simply provide a one-word stimulus. Like normally if they just give one word, it really isn't helpful for students, because it's very confusing with no context. Like in this example, like they hear "vine," they don't know if they heard "wine" or "vine," and it's very hard for them. even for advanced learners sometimes. Paraphrase recognition. So in this case, they must know a little bit of uh, they should be able to paraphrase what they heard. So in this example, they don't answer literally what they heard. They must be able to interpret what they heard. To add a little context, a conversation can be the stimulus task to which test takers must respond with the correct paraphrase. Like in this case, here the criterion is recognition of the adjective form used to indicate country of origin: Canadian, American, Brazilian, Italian. So they hear like a little bit more, but the answer is it's a little bit different from what they heard. Like if they heard, I'm Canadian, so George is from Canada, he comes from Canada. Designing assessment tasks, responsive listening. For responsive listening, these are very short. A question and answer and an answer format can provide some interactivity in this lower end listening task. The test taker's response is the appropriate answer to a question. How much time did you take to do your homework? They must know what is the appropriate response with these 4 options. And students may get confused because there are many. Well, the objective of the previous box is recognition of the WH question, how much, and its appropriate response. The structures are chosen to represent common learner errors. Responding to how much versus how much longer, confusing how much in reference to time versus the more frequent reference to money, or confusing a WH question with yes or no question. So they must know the answer from the context of the question. None of the tasks so far discussed have to be framed in a multiple choice format. They can be offered in a more open-ended framework in which test takers write or speak the response. The previous box then would look like this. So, how much time did you take to do your homework? And they will write or speak their response. If open-ended response formats gain a small amount of authenticity and creativity, they of course suffer some in their practicality, as teachers must then read students' responses and judge their appropriateness, which takes time. So I think this is the worst one, because in the matter of time, like the teacher must listen to or read what students answered, and it takes a lot of time, and normally teachers don't have that much time because they don't have only one student. If you have very few students, you may use this kind of formats, but it's not recommended to use them. Now I will give one example from an app that uses listening comprehension activities and gives a lot of examples of what I just talked about. So let's listen to it.
Friends.
Hello, Jess.
Hi, Tamara.
Do you want to study together?
Sorry, I am busy. I am going to the mall.
But you do not like the mall. A lot of people are at the mall.
Yes,
You do not like people.
yes, but I need to buy something.
I want to go with you.
But,
Please.
okay.
Tamara and Jess go to the mall.
Oh no! I need to buy your birthday present. But the store is closed. I am a bad friend.
Jess, you do not like them all, but you are here to buy my birthday present. You are a good friend.
So in the example we just saw, they combine the grammar translation method, or at least they use the mother tongue to teach students. They take into account that students don't have a very high level, but as the lessons go, they get a little bit harder, and well, they use listening. I think the listening the listening task they use are very appropriate for young learners and even older learners that are trying to learn English for the first time.
So now let's talk about the designing assessment task for selective listening. Remember that selective listening is in which the test taker listens to a limited quantity of oral input and must discern within some specific information. So now let's begin with some techniques. The first one is listening close, sometimes called close dictations or partial dictations. This task requires the test taker to listen to story, monologue, or conversation and simultaneously read the written text in which selected words or phrases have been deleted. The close procedure is most commonly associated with reading only, but the test consists of a passage in which every certain number of words, typically every seventh word, is deleted and the test taker is asked to supply an appropriate word. One potential weakness of listening close techniques is that they may simply become reading comprehension tasks. But in a listening close task, test takers see a transcript of the passage that they are listening to and fill in the blanks with the words or phrases that they hear. In this example, test takers hear an announcement from an airline agent and see the transcript with the underlined words deleted. Here, a shortcoming was avoided by focusing only on the criterion of numbers, but other listening close tasks may focus on a grammatical category, such as verb tenses, articles, two-word verbs, prepositions, or transitions, words, or phrases. In a listening close, deletions are governed by the objective of the test, not by mathematical deletion of every certain number of words, and more than one word must be deleted. Listening close tasks should normally use an exact word method of scoring in which you accept as a correct response only the actual word or phrase that was spoken and consider other appropriate words as incorrect. And you always need to remember that your objective is to test listening comprehension, not grammatical or lexical expectancies. The second one is information transfer. In this technique, orally processed information must be transferred to a visual representation. At the lower end of the scale of linguistic complexity, simple picture-cued items are sometimes efficient rubrics for assessing certain selected information. Here we have some examples. In this one, the example illustrates the need for test takers to focus on just the relevant information, and the objective of this task is to test prepositions and prepositional phrases of location. So other words and phrases, such as backyard, yesterday, and so on, are supplied only as context and don't need to be tested. In this one single photograph is presented to the test taker, who then hears 4 different statements and must choose one of the 4 to describe the photograph. Information transfer tasks may reflect greater authenticity by using charts, maps, grids, timetables, and other artifacts of daily life. Such chart-filling tasks are a good example of oral scanning strategies. A listener must discern from a number of pieces of information which pieces are relevant. Chart-filling tasks increase in difficulty as the linguistic stimulus material becomes more complex. And the last one is sentence repetition. The test taker must retain a stretch of language long enough to reproduce it and then must respond with an oral repetition of that stimulus. A miscue repetition is scored as a miscue listening. Sentence repetition is far from flawless listening assessment task. Book 2001 noted that such tasks are not just tests of listening but tests of general skills. These tasks may test only recognition of sounds, and it can easily be contaminated by lack of short-term memory ability, thus invalidating it as an assessment of comprehension alone. For that reason, sentence repetition tasks should be used with caution. So now is the time to talk about designing assessment tasks for extensive listening. The first one is dictation. In a dictation, test takers hear a passage typically of 50 to 100 words recited 3 times, first at normal speed, second with long pauses between phrases or natural word groups, during which time test takers write down what they have just read, and finally at normal speed once more so they can check their work and proofread. Dictations were thought to be not much more than glorified spelling tests. They require integration of listening and writing in a dictation along with its presupposed knowledge of grammatical and discourse expectancies brought these techniques back into vogue. And also it's important to mention that this technique, dictation, is considered as a quasi-extensive assessment task. The difficulty of a dictation task can be easily manipulated by the length of the word groups, the length of the pauses, the speed at which the text is read, and the complexity of the discourse, grammar, and vocabulary used in the passage. Depending on your context and purpose in administering a dictation, you will need to decide on scoring criteria for several possible kinds of errors. For example, a spelling error only but the word appears to have been heard correctly, spelling an or obvious misrepresentation of a word, illegible word, grammatical error, skip word phrase, permutation of words, additional words not in the original, and replacement of a word with an appropriate synonym. A word caution: let's assume that dictation provides a quick and easy method of assessing extensive listening comprehension. Dictation seems to provide a reasonably valid method of integrating listening and writing skills and for tapping into the cohesive elements of language implied short passages. Then we have the communicative stimulus response task. Here, the test taker is presented with a stimulus, monologue, or conversation and then is asked to respond to a set of comprehension questions. The next one is authentic listening tasks. Here, the nature of a text and sample of performance and set of tasks with limited time frames imply an equal limited capacity to mirror all the real-world context of listening performance. Book in 2001 says that every test requires some component of communicative language ability and no test covers them all. Similarly, with the notion of authenticity, every task shares some characteristics with target language task, and no text is completely authentic. But can we assess oral comprehension in a truly communicative context? The answer could be yes, but note, without some concessions to practicality. And the answer is a more certain yes if we take the liberty of stretching the concept of assessment to extend beyond tests and into a broader framework of alternatives. So now let's talk about these possibilities. The first one is the note-taking. The notes become an indirect but arguably valid form assessing global listening comprehension. The task fulfills the criteria of cognitive demand, communicative language, and authenticity. Here we have one example form of a midterm examination in the American Language Institute at San Francisco State University that uses a 15-minute lecture as a stimulus. These notes are evaluated by the teacher on a 30-point system as follows. For example, 0 to 15 points for visual representation. If the notes are clear, if it can easily find and retrieve information, if there is space on the paper, and so on. 0 to 10 points for accuracy. And here we have some questions to answer to get those puntuation. Do you accurately indicate main ideas from lecturers? Do you note important details and supporting information and examples? Do you leave out important information and tangents? And 0 to 5 points for symbols and abbreviations. If the person uses symbols and abbreviations as much as possible to save time, and avoid writing whole words, and avoid writing down every single word that the lecturer says. The process of scoring is time-consuming, and because of the subjectivity of the point system, it lacks some reliability. The next one is editing. An oral authentic task provides both a written and a spoken stimulus and requires the test taker to listen for discrepancies. The scoring achieves relatively high reliability as there are usually a small number of specific differences that must be identified. Here is the way the task proceeds. First, the test taker reads the written stimulus material, for example, a news report, an email, notes, etc. Then the test taker hears a spoken version of the stimulus that deviates in a finite number of facts or opinions from the original written form. And finally, the test taker marks the written stimulus by circling any word, phrase, or fact or opinion that show a discrepancy between the two versions. One potentially interesting set of stimuli for such task is the description of a political scandal, first from a newspaper with a political bias, and then from a radio broadcast from an alternative news station. The third one is the interpretive tasks. Here it extends the stimulus material to a longer stretch of discourse and forces the test takers to infer a response. The potential stimuli include song lyrics, recited poetry, radio or television news reports, and an oral account of an experience. Test takers are then directed to interpret the stimulus by answering a few questions in open-ended form. For example, why was the singer feeling sad? What events might have led up to the reciting of this poem? And so on. but the task conforms to certain time limitations and the questions can be quite specific, even though the test taker to use inference. While reliable scoring may be an issue, the authenticity of the interaction in this task and potential washback to the student surely give it some prominence among communicative assessment procedures. And the last one is retelling. Here, the test taker must identify the gist, main idea, purpose, supporting point, and/or conclusion to show full comprehension. The test taker listens to a story or news events and simply retell it or summarize it, either orally or in writing. Scoring is partially determined by specifying a minimum number of elements that must appear in the retelling. The reliability may suffer, and the time and effort needed to read and evaluate the response lowers practicality. Validity, cognitive processing, communicative ability, and authenticity are well incorporated into the task. And finally, we hope that you remember, why is the listening skill important? Mention one of the 4 types of listening that you use in your classroom. What is the responsive listening? What is very important in intensive listening? Which is the quasi-extensive technique? And mention one potential stimuli of interpretive tasks. Thank you for your attention. Have a nice day.